The reel begins with the sound of a projector, but the light doesn't warm the room, it interrogates it. Smoke drifts across the frame like a classified memo no one signed, and in that pale beam you glimpse soldiers who never got parades, agents who learned that peace is only war with better manners, and mercenaries hired to do the things nations refuse to admit. Their faces aren't radiant. They are overexposed, as if the truth burned through the emulsion long before the censors arrived. In the aisles, posters promise heroism, but the images on screen keep slipping. A cut that jumps too quickly, a line that lands too heavy, a silence that lasts one beat longer than comfort allows. You realize the story isn't what survived the edit, it's what bled out on the floor. 5 films, scattered across a decade and a half, tried to tell us that victory can be a mask, that orders can sound like lullabies, that the enemy sometimes wears our reflection. What if the truth was never in the headline battle, but in the shadows after it ended? These are the 5 stories Hollywood tried to erase, but the cuts still bleed. Between the late 1970 seconds and the mid-1990 seconds, Hollywood stood at a crossroads it refused to name. The Vietnam War had ended not with victory, but with exhaustion. The Cold War demanded new villains, new myths, and new propaganda reels. Studios wanted heroes again, men who bled neatly, who died beautifully, who could make violence look like discipline and politics sound like patriotism. But in the shadows of those sound stages, smaller productions began to whisper a different language. They weren't glamorous or well-funded. They came from forgotten corners of Los Angeles, from independent European crews shooting under fake names in Manila or Prague. These films stripped away the glory and left only the machinery. Soldiers abandoned by their own governments, assassins who couldn't tell orders from sins, mercenaries who realized that freedom was just another contract. They were too real, too bitter, and too honest for an industry built on illusions of control. Some of them tried to camouflage as B-movies. Others were silenced before they could even find distribution. Yet together, they form a ghost archive, a record of what war looked like when no one was supposed to be watching. Each reel carries the residue of truth that Hollywood's cleaner narratives buried. Let's go back to the 5 films they never wanted you to see. Film has shown. The Kill Reflex, 1989. It opens with smoke, neon, and a man who moves like he's already seen too much. Fred Williamson plays a detective named Thunderbolt, but the thunder never comes, only the echo. On the surface, it's a revenge thriller, a cop seeking justice for a murdered partner. Yet underneath the gunfire and slow-motion chases lies something quieter, more unsettling, the ghost of a soldier who never made it home. Williamson, a real-life veteran, built the film around what the studios wouldn't show, the lingering war that begins when the shooting stops. His character drifts through alleys and warehouses that feel less like sets and more like a mind still stuck in Saigon. The editing is rough, the dialogue sparse, but that's the point. The Kill Reflex feels unfinished because its war never ended. Behind the scenes, the film fought its own battle. Released during the Reagan era, when Hollywood preferred its heroes clean and patriotic, it was dismissed as cheap and incoherent. Critics saw flaws where Williamson had hidden confessions. A black veteran telling a story about betrayal and systemic rot didn't fit the national image of power being restored. So they filed it under blaxploitation leftovers and moved on. Yet, if you listen closely between the gunshots and synth notes, you'll hear what Williamson was really saying. That some wars don't make medals, they make ghosts. And that the reflex to kill doesn't fade when the credits roll. Film #2. The Soldier. 1982. A helicopter drifts over a frozen wasteland. Inside, men speak in codes, numbers, orders, and lies. From the first frame, the soldier feels sterile, efficient, almost surgical. It's a film built like a machine, and that's exactly what it wants to be. On the surface, it's the story of an elite CIA operative racing to stop a Soviet plot to contaminate the world's oil supply. But beneath the steel and slogans, it's a Cold War confession disguised as entertainment. Directed by James Glickenhaus, the movie came out when America was rearming both its arsenal and its mythology. Action heroes were becoming political instruments, proof that moral certainty could be manufactured on cue. Yet, the soldier refuses to celebrate its own violence. Every explosion feels hollow, every line of dialogue stripped of emotion. It's as if the film itself has been brainwashed, repeating patriotic phrases it no longer believes. Rumors at the time suggested government influence on its production, technical advisors from intelligence circles, quiet funding from military contractors, a fascination with oil as the new battlefield. Even the soundtrack, a relentless electronic pulse by Tangerine Dream, sounds like an alarm that never stops ringing. In the end, the hero succeeds, but there's no relief, just a lingering sense that nothing was won. The enemy wasn't a country. It was the machinery of paranoia itself. The soldier wasn't banned, but it was quietly buried, ignored by critics and forgotten by audiences who didn't want to see their reflection in the lens. It remains one of the few films brave enough to suggest that patriotism, when automated, becomes its own weapon. Film #3, The Dogs of War, 1980. The first shot is all darkness, a soldier's eyes, half lit by the glow of a flare. Christopher Walken plays Jamie Shannon, a mercenary hired to overthrow a small African government. He doesn't fight for a country or a cause. He fights because war is the only place where silence makes sense. On paper, it's another adventure thriller, men, guns, betrayal. But The Dogs of War isn't about battlefields. It's about the price of obeying when no one remembers why. Walken drags the film through mud and memory. His performance feels haunted, restrained, as if every word is a confession the camera wasn't meant to hear. Behind him, the landscapes blur into smoke, jungle, city, jungle again, all interchangeable, all bleeding into the same hopeless tone. Director John Irvin, who had witnessed real combat as a documentarian, shot violence not as spectacle but as fatigue. The bullets don't thrill, they echo. When the film premiered, audiences wanted another Apocalypse Now. What they got instead was something too close, too personal. It revealed mercenaries not as heroes, but as discarded tools of empire, Western ghosts paid to erase governments for profit. That truth made distributors nervous. The marketing reframed it as an action epic, cutting away its conscience. Still, the wound remained. Walken's final stare into the camera feels less like victory and more like testimony. The Dogs of War whispers what few war films dared to admit, that sometimes the men who survive the mission never really return. Film Rautavir Hidden Assassin, 1995. The snow in Prague looks clean, but nothing beneath it is. Hidden Assassin opens with a political murder on a balcony, a perfect shot captured against the city's ancient spires. Dolph Lundgren plays Michael Dane, a U.S. agent sent to find who pulled the trigger. But the longer he hunts, the more he realizes the assassin isn't just a person. It's the system that trained him. On the surface, it's a sleek 90 seconds thriller, chase sequences, coded messages, a romance threaded through gunfire. Yet under that choreography lies the exhaustion of a world that no longer knows why it's still fighting. The Cold War had ended, but Hollywood hadn't moved on. It just changed the accents of its villains. Dane's investigation leads nowhere because peace itself has become an illusion, a currency traded by governments pretending to disarm while plotting the next justification for control. Behind the production, Hidden Assassin suffered its own erasure. Shot partly in Europe with shifting financiers, it was released under different titles, The Shooter, Hidden Assassin, and quietly dumped to video. Critics called it generic, but that generic surface hid a strange melancholy. A spy who no longer believes in nations, a city haunted by invisible wars. The cinematography lingers on reflections, glass, snow, the gleam of a gun barrel, as if searching for meaning that's already gone. Lundgren's performance, stripped of irony, plays like an elegy for every soldier who was told the mission still mattered. Hidden Assassin wasn't a failure. It was a farewell to the fantasy that peace could ever be scripted. Film #5, The Last Hunter, 1980. It begins in the jungle, not the one from newsreels, but its imitation. Smoke machines, fake gunfire, and an Italian director chasing the ghost of a war his country never fought. The Last Hunter, directed by Antonio Margheriti, was Italy's uninvited answer to Apocalypse Now. Shot in the Philippines with recycled props and exhausted extras, it was meant to be another exploitation film. But somewhere in the chaos, It became something else, a fever dream about guilt borrowed from another nation. David Warbeck plays Captain Henry Morris, an American soldier sent on a doomed mission during the final days of Vietnam. The script offers cliches: torture, rescue, redemption. Yet Margariti's camera lingers on the absurdity: soldiers screaming orders into the void, helicopters circling ruins already bombed to dust. The editing fractures reality. The war becomes a loop, repeating until it eats itself. What makes The Last Hunter haunting isn't its imitation, but its honesty about imitation. Europe wanted to process America's trauma, to relive the spectacle without the sin. But in doing so, the film exposes the contamination of cinema itself, how every attempt to recreate horror becomes part of it. The blood looks too red, the jungle too green, and the faces too numb to still be acting. The movie was banned in some countries for its brutality, yet quietly adored by filmmakers who saw its truth. That imitation can be confession. The Last Hunter is not just about Vietnam, it's about how every culture rewrites war until it feels righteous again. Some films reveal courage. This one revealed complicity. And that's why Hollywood pretended it never existed. Bonus fact: the film that never made it home. In 1983, a small independent crew began shooting a film called Operation Exodus. No studio logo, no distributor, just a handful of veterans, journalists, and camera operators who had seen too much. The story was meant to follow a group of disillusioned soldiers returning from Vietnam to discover that the war had followed them home through bureaucracy, addiction, and the quiet violence of forgetting. But the cameras stopped rolling after only 3 weeks. Funding disappeared. Equipment was seized for insurance violations. 2 of the writers were subpoenaed for using classified references in the script. The footage, about 40 minutes of grainy film, was stored in a Los Angeles warehouse and never recovered after a mysterious fire. Only fragments survive. A soldier walking through fog in an airport hangar. A letter burning in slow motion. A whispered line: "We came back, but something stayed there." Rumors persist that the government intervened. Worried the film depicted veterans organizing against military contractors. Others claim it was simply bad luck, another casualty of an era allergic to truth. But in those missing reels lies the most honest war film never seen, one that refused to choose between heroism and shame because it knew they were the same costume worn on different days. No one ever finished Operation Exodus, but its ghost lingers in every forgotten frame of the 1,980 seconds, a reminder that cinema doesn't need censorship when silence works faster. Some films fail on screen, others were never even allowed to fail. When the lights fade and the reels slow to a stop, what remains isn't the image of victory, it's the echo of doubt. These 5 films, scattered across forgotten decades and bargain bin shelves, share one wound. They looked at war without its uniform. Hollywood wanted catharsis, not consequence. Redemption, not residue. But in each frame, you can feel the struggle of filmmakers trying to expose what the industry was built to disguise: that war doesn't end when the guns fall silent. It migrates into memory, into stories, into the very myths we consume for comfort. The Kill Reflex mourned the soldiers left behind by their own country. The soldier exposed the machinery of paranoia that replaced conscience with circuitry. The dogs of war stripped empire of its excuses. Hidden Assassin watched peace turn into theater. The Last Hunter showed imitation as the final act of guilt. Together they form a single confession. The reel has always been more truthful than the headline. In the end, every frame is both a document and a denial, a reminder that art doesn't erase violence, it preserves its shape. The shadows flicker, the projector hums, and the truth stays spliced between cuts no one was meant to see. If the past decades taught us anything, it's that film never just records history, it edits it. Somewhere between the script and the censorship, between the reel and the release, the truth was trimmed to fit the frame. But these stories, these war ghosts, still whisper beneath the static, reminding us that celluloid can lie as easily as it can confess. Which of these films do you think told the truth too early or too clearly for Hollywood to handle? Share your thoughts below, and let the conversation keep what the studios tried to forget. Real secrets, where the truth was always in the edit.